Security reinforcements underway outside the White House ahead of the U.S. election. Democratic candidate Kamala Harris warns of potential election chaos. And Israeli airstrikes have caused widespread destruction in eastern Lebanon. As the U.S. presidential election approaches, polls indicate a tight race, prompting heightened security measures across the capital. With just 2 days to go before the election, workers have been seen reinforcing security outside the White House and the official residence of the vice president. At the White House, crews are erecting additional fencing to expand the enclosed perimeter, which already features barricades. Secret Service agents are on duty to ensure the building's security. Tourists visiting the area expressed their enthusiasm for being in Washington, D.C., capturing photographs and soaking in the electric atmosphere surrounding the election. Democratic vice presidential candidate Tim Walz has urged Arizona voters to cast their ballots as Vice President Harris and former President Trump and their running mates make a last-minute push in key swing states, with millions of Americans already having voted ahead of the November 5th election, tomorrow, of course. National polls, including the latest Reuters and Ipsos, indicate a tight race between Trump and Kamala Harris.
But because he could be president of the United States again.
And as she cast her vote by mail, Kamala Harris warned of potential election chaos. Harris has pledged to work towards unity, emphasizing the current election's impact on the nation's future. Speaking at a rally in Michigan, she outlined plans for tax cuts and affordable health care, especially for seniors, promising to address pressing issues without political motives.
And we are going to make sure that we fight together for the promise of America.
I actually just filled out my mail-in ballot.
Kamala Harris has made her final pitch in East Lansing, addressing the state's Arab American community with remarks on civilian casualties in Gaza and tensions between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon.
And I want to say, this year has been difficult, given the scale of death and destruction in Gaza, and given the civilian casualties and displacement in Lebanon. It is devastating. And as president, I will do everything in my power to end the war in Gaza. To bring home the hostages, end the suffering in Gaza, ensure Israel is secure, and ensure the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, freedom, security, and self-determination.
Meanwhile, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has promised party time after Tuesday's election if he defeats Democrat Kamala Harris. He emphasized immigration issues too during his final rally in Georgia.
But all I can say is on Tuesday, just go out and vote, and we're going to close this thing out, and it's going to be party time. It's going to be party time. And this is really all you need to know. Kamala broke it, and I'll fix it, and we'll do it very quickly.
The latest NBC News poll has shown a tie between Harris and Trump, with each securing 49% of registered voters' support. Conducted from October the 30th to November the 2nd, the poll surveyed 1,000 voters. It reveals Harris's growing support among Democrats, especially for her advocacy of the middle classes. Trump, meanwhile, banks on his economic strengths and positive views from his previous term.
People that somehow the integrity of our voting system is not intact so that they don't vote.
Also, a recent poll by the New York Times and Siena College has revealed mounting concerns over the state of democracy in the US. More than three-quarters of respondents cited the spread of lies and refusal to accept results as the gravest threats in the election. Some voters voiced worries over a potential repeat of the 2020 election turmoil. The U.S. electoral system balances representation through the House and Senate, ensuring diverse state voices in Congress.
The Union of America's 50 states, which shaped the nation's unique electoral system, was not easily achieved. The U.S. Congress, comprising the House of Representatives and the Senate, operates with distinct election processes and representation structures. Every 2 years, American citizens elect members of the House of Representatives. This structure evolved over time, culminating in the 1787 Connecticut Compromise, which established population-based representation in the House and equal representation in the Senate, with 2 senators per state. House elections start with party primaries within each district, followed by a general election every even-numbered November. Representatives serve 2-year terms, focusing on federal legislation, revenue bills, and other initiatives, with the House Speaker leading as the majority party figure. Senators, originally appointed by state legislatures, have been directly elected by popular vote since the 17th Amendment in 1913. When the U.S. reached 50 states in 1959, the Senate's membership was set at 100. Senate elections occur in 3 phases, electing roughly 1/3 of the body every 2 years, 33 senators in the first 2 cycles and 34 in the third. This staggered 6-year term structure ensures consistent representation, with 1/3 of Senate seats open for election biennially. If no vice presidential candidate secures an electoral college majority, the Senate selects from the top 2 candidates, with the vice president serving as Senate president. Held alongside House elections, Senate elections involve vital roles in approving treaties, confirming Supreme Court justice, federal judges, ambassadors, and other executive nominees. This unique electoral system and power-sharing arrangement contribute to America's enduring political stability.
So, with less than 24 hours to go until the polls open, let's cross over to Hanny in the newsroom. Hanny.
Thank you, Mark. And for further analysis on the U.S. election process so far, we're joined from Alabama by Professor of Political Science at Troy University, Dr. Doug Davis. Dr. Davis, welcome to Q News. Now, sir, if we go with a Republican win scenario, how might the U.S. positions towards traditional allies and adversaries shift if Trump returns to power?
Well, first off, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. And if Trump comes to power, there are a lot of checks in the U.S. government, and there should really not be that much of a difference when it comes to allies with supporting them in the long run. With Trump, you have to remember that you have to distinguish between rhetoric and reality and policies. And the good news about the United States is, regardless of who is president, there are a lot of institutional checks and balances that keep them in place. Now, that said, with Trump, we do see a clear change when it comes to policies in 2 regions. One would be he would up the rhetoric against our allies in Europe, but in the end, nothing would change. I mean, we would still support all of our NATO commitments under Trump. And secondly, we would have a different policy towards the Middle East. And Trump would be very clearly, I think, much more aligned with Israel and the Sunni states against Iran. So both both of those sets of relationships, which have some kind of, of transformation under the Biden administration, would probably see a new transformation under Trump. And again, because of the way Trump runs and governs office, with a lot of, of immediate change in rhetoric, there would be a lot more noise. But in the end, I think the United States will continue to honor its commitments, and I don't think there'll be that much of a difference when it comes to our relationships with our allies.
Well, immigration has been one of the main issues discussed during the campaign. What impact would Trump's return have on the immigration policies, particularly regarding the border wall and restrictions on immigration?
The last time Trump came to office, there were some changes that, for example, that made it harder for some students come to study in the United States. But I don't anticipate that happening again. But I do think that the U.S. would, in fact, defend its southern border much more adamantly under Trump. The wall, there's no budget for this. I mean, there will be some token movement towards constructing a wall, but in the end, we will probably just have more border guards on and doing a different type of enforcement that would secure and defend the southern border of the United States under Trump as much as possible. Now, even under Trump, of course, that's not going to be perfect, but that is, in fact, I think, one of the main differences between Trump and Harris. And if you remember, the Biden administration said that he'd be willing to secure the southern border if he was able to make a political deal, which means that the capacity to do that was there, but the willingness was not. And so if the Republicans do come to power in Washington, the willingness will in fact be there, and the ability has always been there. The U.S. could always defend its border. It just often chose not to.
What about the health sector? What ways could Trump's administration alter or repeal Biden's healthcare policies?
Well, that is a great question. But when it comes to domestic politics, the president has very little say, very little control. That will mostly be determined by Congress. He can issue some executive orders which have no legal authority in the United States, and any court could really drag those down. The one area where the president does set policy is by proposing an agenda to Congress at the beginning of every term. And so the president could, in fact, propose some policies towards healthcare. But in the end, that this is something that's not under the president's jurisdiction. It's not something the president can really change readily. Although every president argues that I would do this, it's something that it's really in the hands of Congress, and Congress will be the one to determine that, not the president.
Dr. Doug Davis, the Professor of Political Science at Troy University, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. And Mark, back to you.
Thank you very much, Hani. Now let's get the latest developments in Lebanon.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Israeli airstrikes have caused widespread destruction in the eastern Lebanese city of Baalbek, hitting historical landmarks, government buildings and residential areas. In the nearby town of Duris, a civilian's home was completely destroyed. That's according to Shafiq Qassem Shaheda, the head of the Baalbek Municipalities Union. He said that the strikes also heavily damaged the surrounding area, including the municipal building and Christian cemeteries. She had noted that the residential target had not been on Israel's announced list of targets. The Israeli Occupation Army has released video footage showing soldiers, tanks and armoured vehicles taking part in a ground assault on the outskirts of southern Lebanon. Meanwhile, the Lebanese Health Authority reported that the death toll from Israeli attacks on Lebanon has now risen to 2,986, with 13,402 injured since October 2023. In the past 24 hours alone, 18 people have been killed and 83 injured. An Israeli occupation military report has hinted at a possible end to hostilities in Lebanon in 10 to 14 days. The report speculated on a buffer zone along the southern Lebanese border, referencing extensive damage inflicted on 11 nearby villages. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated that Hezbollah must be pushed back beyond the Litani River, regardless of any potential ceasefire agreement, to prevent the group from remaining. Netanyahu emphasized that this is essential for restoring peace and security in the north, enabling the return of Israeli settlers to the region and responding forcefully to any threats against Israel. Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdel Ati has discussed regional tensions with Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi. Emphasizing the risks of a regional war, Abdel Ati stressed that the need for Lebanon to elect a unifying president and avoid external interference, affirming Egypt's support for Lebanon's sovereignty. Iran's foreign ministry has warned that ongoing violence in Gaza and Lebanon is destabilizing the region. The Iranian foreign ministry further condemned Israel's actions and cautioned against attacks on Iran. The ministry also criticized Germany's decision to close Iranian consulates, saying it harms bilateral relations.
دشمنی‌های آمریکا در طول سال‌های گذشته در مقابله با تحریم‌های آمریکا
Now let's get the latest developments in Gaza. Israeli settlers have launched twin attacks on the Palestinian city of Al-Bira and the town of Deir Dibwan, setting 20 vehicles ablaze. Palestinian sources reported that settlers fired shots, preventing civil defense from extinguishing fires. Separately, Israeli forces sealed off Kolandia, a village, barring farmers from accessing olive groves. The Israeli occupation forces have arrested 12 Palestinians, including a minor and former detainees, in a wide-ranging overnight raid. The latest detentions bring the total since the Gaza war began to over 11,600, with reported violence and property damage accompanying the operations. The World Health Organization has reported that 6 people, including 4 children, were injured in an Israeli drone strike targeting a polio vaccination site in Gaza. The organization announced plans to launch the 3rd phase of its polio vaccination campaign in northern Gaza on Saturday. The campaign, initially scheduled for October 23rd, has been delayed due to heavy bombardments, mass evacuation orders, and the lack of sustained humanitarian pauses. According to the official Palestinian news agency, Wafa, and the WHO, the attack occurred at the Sheikh Radwan Health Center in Gaza City, where an Israeli military drone reportedly struck the facility. Israeli airstrikes targeted homes near Kemal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia, killing and injuring several Palestinians. Furthermore, 5 were injured in a separate artillery attack on the Al Mufti land north of Nusrat camp. Reports indicate another shelling in northern Gaza, with additional casualties in Zaytun and Nusrat. Palestinian media sources have reported over 1,800 fatalities and 4,000 injuries in northern Gaza as Israeli forces continue to bar humanitarian aid. The blockade has left 3,800 aid trucks stranded, devastating civilians. Hospitals have been destroyed, medical staff targeted, and infrastructure obliterated. The Palestinian presidency has condemned Israel's official notice to the United Nations of severing ties with UNRWA. Presidential spokesperson Nabil Abu Rudaina called the decision a violation of international humanitarian law aimed at erasing the refugee issue and obstructing UNRWA's work. He urged the international community to take concrete steps against Israel's actions. Egypt's foreign minister held a call with his French counterpart, discussing immediate efforts for a ceasefire in Gaza and facilitating humanitarian aid. Egypt reaffirmed its rejection of Israeli measures blocking aid, emphasizing the need to end the occupation and establish a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Arab League Secretary-General Ahmed Aboul-Gheit has met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Cairo to discuss Gaza and the West Bank's situation. Talks centered on efforts to halt the assault on Gaza, steps toward a ceasefire, and Arab initiatives to support a two-state solution and secure UN membership for Palestine. The Israeli Broadcasting Authority has reported that Eli Feldstein, the spokesperson for Prime Minister Netanyahu, remains detained over leaked intelligence documents. Details are under publication restrictions, but the documents reportedly involve Gaza, detainees' negotiations, and sensitive cabinet meetings. The scandal has reportedly worsened rifts between Netanyahu's office and the defense establishment. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid has declared Netanyahu unfit to lead in the critical wartime period. In a joint statement with Benny Gantz, Lapid accused Netanyahu of politicizing intelligence documents and stressed the need for a full investigation into unauthorized possession of classified materials.
This is way more important. Israel as a nation will not heal.
Families of Israeli detainees have accused Netanyahu's affiliates of undermining national security, claiming leaked documents jeopardize the detainees' lives. They urged accountability, asserting that the leaks reduce chances for safe returns and increase the risk of fatalities. Some economic news now. The Standing Committee of China's National People's Congress is convening later today, with analysts anticipating endorsement of major spending initiatives to boost the economy. Amid the US election backdrop, lawmakers are expected to approve a fiscal package in the trillions of yuan, aimed at alleviating pressure on local governments and recapitalizing state lenders. While economists from Goldman Sachs and others predict at least 1 trillion yuan in special sovereign bonds to replenish bank capital, detailed plans to support consumption may take months to materialize. World shares were mostly higher as markets reacted to China's leaders began a meeting to yield new support for the economy, while investors also closely watched the results of the upcoming US elections. In the United States, early trading, the future for the S&P 500 inched up 0.1%, while that for the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.2%. In European markets, Germany's DAX slipped 0.1%, the CAC 40 in Paris edged 0.1% lower, and Britain's FTSE 100 traded 0.3% higher. In Asia, Hong Kong's Hang Seng gained 0.3%, the Shanghai Composite Index picked up 1.2%, the Kospi in Seoul jumped 1.8%, and the markets in Tokyo were closed for a holiday. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin, but here's a recap of what we've been covering. Security reinforcements underway outside the White House ahead of the US election. The Democratic candidate, Kamala Harris, warns of potential election chaos. And Israeli airstrikes have caused widespread destruction in eastern Lebanon. And that's all for our news bulletin for this hour, but follow us on our social media platforms at NewsEGY. Thanks for watching.